Ready?
Yep.
Okay, welcome everyone. This is the July 9th, 2018 meeting of the Transportation Commission. Welcome everybody, and first item on the agenda is to approve a couple of meeting minutes here. The March 29th special meeting, which was for the O'Connell Road extension, and then our regular meeting on, let's see, and the June 20th study session minutes also. There we go, and the May 7th regular meeting. Do I have a motion on that?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Okay, we are moving on to general public comment. I think you guys kind of know the rules by now. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues that are not scheduled on the regular agenda. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes, and please self-govern. We don't like to have to cut people off, so do your very best to pace yourselves on that 3-minute mark. As a general practice, we will not discuss or debate these items, nor will we make decisions on the items presented at this time. Individuals are asked to come to the microphone, sign in, and state their name and address, and speakers should address all comments to the commission. So, do we have any general public comment? Carol?
I was, by the way, I want to thank you. You've come a long way. The conversations you folks are having now are nothing like when you first started. We are no longer the Traffic Safety Commission. So I'm really proud of that. I was looking over our old task force recommendations, which created this commission, and I was comparing it to your bylaws, and I encourage you to do the same. The one thing I noticed that was rather concerning in the recommendations, we intended that there would be more interaction with the public, giving the public a chance to get relief, because in the past it was bureaucratic and just certain things were done and the rest was left on the wayside. So we were thinking there would be more interaction. And I encourage you to look at your bylaws and see. There was one section, I didn't bring it with me, where it talks about the commission and its communication and people in the task force report, but when it was transferred over to the bylaws, that part was left out. So you might want to look at that. The other thing I saw was that in the bylaws, everything that the commission was expected to do was to make recommendations to the city commission. Now, currently, we're making them to engineers, but then the engineers have had to drive this to get it going. So we need to work on the processes. And then the one that you all know came from me is, what are the processes? How do you get on the agenda? How do you, I don't know, just lots of things that need to be worked out still. Thank you.
Thanks, Carol.
Hi, my name is Michael Allman, speaking for the Sustainability Action Network. You probably know, since one of your members, Catherine Charts, is on the Bicycle Advisory Committee, that they are engaged in a 5-year cycle now of updating the countywide Douglas County City of Lawrence bicycle plan. There is approximately 85% of the population of the county and streets and bikeways and sidewalks, whatever, in the city of Lawrence. But the bicycle plan is being developed by the County Bicycle Advisory Committee. And at this point, there's no provisions until the very end for you people, the Transportation Commission, to be involved in that work. As you know, your role is coming up and looking at policies and projects and programs, whatever, for bicycle pedestrian issues in the city. I think you deserve a bigger role in this process, and I would encourage you to make a proposal and take a vote to request, I don't know if the audience would be the Bicycle Advisory Committee or the City Commission, whoever, that you be given a larger role earlier on in the process to provide input, to review, whatever is being done in that work. So that's what I would like to see happen. Thanks.
I assume that was general public comment.
Yes.
All right. Is there any other general public comment? So we are ready for item 3. Is that where we're at? All right. So pedestrian crossing Monterey Way, 6th Street to Bob Billings Parkway.
Get us on the right page here. Good evening, Amanda Saheen, Transportation Engineer. Bringing this item back that we discussed in November about traffic calming request on Monterey Way from 6th Street to Bob Billings Parkway. At that point, kind of just going back here on some of the data that was collected, the average speed, or the 85th percentile speed, was 44 miles per hour over that stretch of road, and the volume was 7,400 vehicles. Collector Street, 31 feet width. The staff at that point recommended traffic calming be approved. It was denied. There was a lot of residents who weren't really supportive of speed humps in particular. And so the direction was given to look at a pedestrian crossing. Well, we wanted to wait, obviously, until the weather got warmer, and then it continued to snow in April. So it took a little while. But starting on the 31st of May, we went out there and we had our interns sit out there for 3 days straight and count people crossing the street. What they noticed was a lot of people were driving to that park. We checked with Parks and Rec. The shelter was reserved. There was a party there on that Saturday. Still, most people drove, they noticed, to that park. There was a few kind of large groups like playing volleyball that crossed, which was where you got some of the higher volumes. But still, the peak hour in those 3 days was 9 crossings. The highest they saw in the time they were there from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. was 24 people. That was really 12 people twice in most cases. So the volume was pretty low. They counted basically everyone who didn't cross at the existing intersections. So the Harvard roundabout they didn't count, and Bob Billings they didn't count. But anything in between there, they counted those pedestrians. Since staff has went back and looked at some of the guidelines, and obviously with the speeds out there, it's not recommended that this be just a marked crosswalk. It's 44 miles per hour, over 40 generally is not recommended for that. I have since also, I included several emails. I've got several emails from the original requester, and really there's more of a concern than the pedestrians crossing, and I understand fully. Cars are traveling very fast, and I think there's a concern over the whole mile stretch that cars are traveling very fast. And our thought is, with the money that could be spent, you can't do just a marked crosswalk. The money that could be spent on just a pedestrian crossing could really be more appropriately used on traffic calming. That would probably impact the street more than one pedestrian crossing that had 20 people to 40 people crossing in a day. We would have to likely do something like a beacon, and that's really only going to slow traffic when it's activated, which with that low number of crossings isn't going to be very often. So what staff's recommending at this point is, being that we have the moratorium, this was previously denied for traffic calming, that once the new policy's in place, we think we should evaluate it again for traffic calming under the new policy. That doesn't mean that a marked crosswalk can't be part of that traffic calming project, but I do not think that the traffic, that a marked crosswalk is going to achieve what the neighborhood desired out of this request. And I think the money would be better spent on really slowing the speeds over that entire stretch of road. So that's the recommendation. We expect that we should have a policy in place later this year. You know, we're trying to roll it more into a traffic safety program versus just traffic calming. And we expect to have something later this year and be able to evaluate some of these requests that we've gotten in the meantime. So this is one of those we would like to do that with. Any questions?
Can I ask what the conversation was around speed humps?
As far as what?
I mean, that they, I don't love them either, but the way they were.
Yeah, and I think the struggle is on this street, it really functions more probably like a minor arterial than a local street. And so it's a pretty high volume street, and I think, you know, they do create noise. And I don't know if that's what the concern was, but I do know a lot of the residents emailed were, I don't want speed humps. And also, they didn't want roundabouts. And I don't know that there's really any intersections that would warrant a roundabout anyway on that stretch. But I think maybe something that was more of like a chicanes or some horizontal deflection could be something we could use there. I don't know if you have any other ideas, but I think we could, if speed humps are completely, if they're against that, I think we could come up with some other treatments that might be appropriate there that could have the effect. Also narrowing the road, you know, in certain areas. It's just at that width where it's not quite wide enough to stripe bike lanes, but, and leave, you know, really enough room for the travel lanes, but it's too wide for 2 lanes of traffic, and it allows them to go too fast. So I think something needs to be done there, but I believe it's more in the traffic calming realm that probably will benefit. But I could definitely see, as we do that, doing something where we do some you know, bump out the curb or do a median island and put a marked crosswalk in with that traffic calming. Once we got the speeds down to 35 miles per hour or less, as you can see on this chart, it says that's a candidate for a marked crosswalk without a beacon. So I think that's probably more the direction that we would recommend. I think it would have a better impact, because some of the things noted were like kids are playing soccer and they kick the ball and it goes into the street. Well, a pedestrian crossing isn't going to help with that issue, those type of things. So that's why I really think the intent is to get the speeds down from what the neighbors want. I know there's been some things going around about the requester has sent in saying we'll put some stop signs in. As you know, we've had the discussion many times, stop signs are not appropriate for traffic calming. They actually do more harm than good when you start putting them in places that aren't warranted. And I know it seems like a simple, cheap fix, but it's really for the community as a whole, not a good route to go.
When did you do the, I'm sorry, when did you do the study again?
May 31st, June 1st, June 2nd.
Because that would also be coincide with Castle being under construction, and I live, it backs right up.
Oh, I'm sorry, the pedestrian.
Well, I understand that, but also with, the other one was earlier.
The other one was in
last fall.
October.
Oh, okay, okay.
Which Wakarusa was under construction.
Yeah.
So yes, they're still, I mean, I think we do need to probably get counts once Wakarusa's done, Castle's done, and really see, but even if the volumes go down, I doubt the speeds go down.
No, the speeds won't go down, but the volume will go down,
Yeah.
most likely, yeah.
I was thinking, Amanda, that making counts is one thing, but, and I know you can't answer this question, but I think it's worth thinking about how many kids, adults, people that live in those neighborhoods don't go to the park because of Monterey. And, you know, would that park be more utilized? Would it be, if it were safer, perceptibly safer, for people to send their kids down there? And I think the answer is likely, yeah, it would be. Now, how much, I don't know, but that's a pretty nice amenity for a neighborhood, not to have it, you know, really comfortable for people in the neighborhood to get to, I think.
I will speak on a personal note. We have a 10-year-old. Our neighbors are 7 and 9, and they go to the park by themselves. We're about a half a block to the north of the roundabout, so it's 2 blocks and they have to cross the street.
Sure.
And
Sure.
Yeah, and I fully agree, but I just think when we're looking at a mile stretch, I don't think the pedestrian crossing is where the money is best spent when you're looking at having to do a beacon and spend $25,000–$30,000 in that location, when you could really do a traffic calming project that impacted the speeds over a larger area and then do just a marked crosswalk once you can get those speeds down. I think that's going to have a better impact on the livability of that area and people being able to get to the park than putting in one pedestrian crossing that is activated, you know, minimally. Really, most of the warrants say 20 in an hour is kind of a bottom line where you don't consider doing improvements if you don't get more than 20 pedestrians in an hour. And the most we saw was 9. Now, not to say that that's not going to, you know, that there's other days that that's potentially more. I mean, I know every time we do a pedestrian count, it seems to be, well, you didn't do it the right time of year. This is per all the guidance, this is an appropriate time of year to do a pedestrian count. We also had, like I said, snow in April this year, so it was really a limited time of year. I think the Saturday we were out there, the high was 85. It was a nice day.
Whatever happened to the enforcement side?
We've been talking to the police department. We're still working on that with our traffic safety policy. We're hoping to address that component. They're obviously having their own challenges right now with budget and staffing, but we're working on some things to try to have more of an impact there. We did put the speed monitoring trailer out there, which I know was well received by the neighborhood, and probably could do that again sometime soon. But you know, they're stretched pretty thin without designated officers for enforcement. So I have communicated with them on the areas that we're seeing the high speeds, but it's resources right now, and we're working on it. We're working with PD, trying to come up with a solution for traffic calming that involves them more heavily. So
if this is deferred now, what's the likely timeline for this?
we're hoping to have the traffic safety policy in place by this fall. We're waiting a little bit. There's some budget decisions that kind of have some implications on where we can go with that policy. Because of the way it's funded right now, it limits it pretty significantly. So we're asking for the funding to be moved to another fund to give us some more flexibility with the use of that money. And so we're a little bit on hold, waiting on that budget decision, but that's wrapping up here by August. And then we can know for sure where we're going with the budget, and that'll help us get the policy wrapped up. So,
is the policy being addressed by staff only, or are there any other, is MPO involved, or?
no, it's a city thing. I mean, we'll bring it probably to a study session once we know where the budget is and things like that. We'll bring it to a study session for discussion. But again, with the budget kind of thing, that's City Commission's decision. Wrote a memo recently that was on City Manager's report addressing how we'd like to really make the program more holistic. And right now it only addresses engineering. And we want it to be able to address enforcement, education, engineering, you know, all of those different things. And the way it's funded out of infrastructure sales tax starting next year, it limits our ability to do that. So.
I have some comments on this, but if there are no other questions, I'd like to see if there's public comment before we discuss it more. Is there any public comment on this topic?
For a long time, pedestrians were almost extinct. Counting them was easy. It was 1 or 2. As it gets safer, you're going to have more pedestrians. The 20-somethings are not driving. They don't like driving. They leave their cars behind and they walk. My grandson puts more mileage on his shoes than he does on his car. As we make it safer, the pedestrians are going to come out. The pedestrian counts, they really don't give you a whole lot of information. Like Commissioner Evans says, there's a whole bunch of pedestrians who are not going to go out there in the traffic and get killed. I did have one small comment. I'm not familiar with this stretch, but We found that the pedestrian islands on Louisiana Street, while hated by the drivers, are loved by the pedestrians because it makes it easier to negotiate one lane of traffic at a time. I don't know if that was considered or not, but if it isn't, that would be an option. You want?
Is there something you wanted to add? Or?
Well, yeah, that's what I'm talking about when I say we could add something with the traffic calming that would be an island that has a crosswalk. But the way it is currently with the speeds, it would recommend, a beacon would be recommended with that. If we can get the speeds lower, that would be something we would consider doing as part of the traffic calming project. So they do go hand in hand. Those islands help the pedestrians and they slow traffic, but I think it's just placing one of them over a mile isn't where we feel it's effective.
Is there any other comment on this? Okay, then I'll reiterate what's already been said, but I wanted to just add a couple things. I mean, I agree. So I don't know that this is the wrong approach, but so I understand the reducing speed, the traffic calming first, I guess. But I did kind of want to have a discussion on, I keep hearing this come up, like there are not enough pedestrians present to warrant something. And there's been 3 examples that I can think of this year, and that's 7th and 8th in Tennessee, Monterey Way, and Inverness and Clinton Parkway, in regards to safe routes to school. There are not enough students crossing there to warrant a crossing guard. And what I have brought up several times is if you don't have a safe place to cross, pedestrians aren't going to cross. So it'd be like doing auto counts before the road is paved or before the road is built. And so I kind of feel like, you know, until you can sort of assess the potential rather than saying, well, there's no pedestrians crossing there, because I feel like that's what we've done as probably a country, but definitely as a city in the past has said, well, there's no one crossing there, so let's not do anything, when we need to start thinking of it differently. So whether we're talking about it for this particular item, we need to start looking at what's the potential. And for a lot of these, I think the potential is really high. I mean, I know many, many people who don't let their kids walk to school because there's no crossing guard at Clinton Parkway in Inverness, or because of the kind of intersection it is. And so they're never going to let them cross until it's safe to have kids cross there. I mean, I, as a parent, won't let my 7-year-old cross there alone, and that's what they have to do. So until we can start looking at this differently, and maybe it's a different I mean, it's clearly a different conversation, I think, but I think it's a conversation that we need to have and we need to stop talking about. So I think that's a policy discussion that needs to happen somehow, somewhere, or it's just going to keep coming back up. As far as the Monterey Way, I would agree with that. I mean, it seems that first we need to slow down traffic. I mean, I think that'll work. I think it'll work either way, but I think that's an approach that would be fine, to wait till after the policy, we see the new policy. So that's my take on it. I don't know if there's any other.
Technically, is there any such thing as pedestrian demand monitoring? With traffic, generators and tractors. Is there any methodology like that out there now?
To predict traffic or pedestrian generation?
Yeah. Just like doing Transcat for traffic.
Not that I'm aware of.
I think Jessica mentioned you could look at things, but it's pretty expensive for a community our size. It's more of a planning probably discussion, but she did mention that there is models you can do, but the size of this community and how expensive it is to do, it's kind of, you know, obviously limited budgets for things, so it's not something that they've done, but we would have to get them involved in that conversation, because I mean, all we can do is go off the professional manuals and recommendations that we have, which all do it based on counts and warrants. And, you know, I agree it'd be great to put them everywhere, but we don't have the funds for that. And so where we have to rely on the professional manuals that we have, which go based off of warrants based on number of pedestrians.
Oh, I understand. I understand what it is.
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I think it's more of a discussion that the MPO would have to be involved with, so.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to comment too that our neighborhood used SurveyMonkey for stuff, and it was really, inexpensive and effective to get a pretty broad response from the neighborhood on the traffic calming circles, for one thing, and the transit hub. And it seems like the city does surveys a lot, and we have, addresses. I don't know what the email database is for the city, but it seems like, to get a sample, I don't know that you could model it, but I'd rather hear from people that live in an area and see, just what the feedback would be. Ron's got 2 kids that do it anyway. I'll bet they're educated, and I'll bet they just don't go wherever they feel like it. I'll bet they go one way every time, But it would be interesting to see if surveys would be an effective way to gauge just something like that. Because I think Aaron made an excellent point about, just the potential for a situation like this with a park. And that's a big deal.
And it wasn't a survey. I mean, I know we had surveys along with the safe routes, but one of the things we did provide, Jessica, we did use GIS, and we did provide all of our student data so we could plot, so we knew where the potential was. But again, you don't know if there's 30 kids sitting in this neighborhood. We don't know if 25 of them are going to walk, if there's a crossing guard, or, you can always ask, but there's data that we've provided, but I'd have to go back and look to see if we have any specific surveys, because I know we do surveys during the walk to school day and things like that, but I don't know if they've actually gone deeper, and I think they have. I would just need to check to see if there's been any polling of the parents, would you do more if this was in place? Or
The surveys there, if I recall correctly, said that the main reason, I did some of the surveys, so the main reason, or one of the main reasons people didn't let their kids walk to school was the amount and speed of traffic. But also, the potential at that intersection was really big. But the way our policy is written is that there have to be a certain number of students crossing before they can do anything there, which really doesn't make sense. But it is another discussion. But it's just a discussion that we eventually need to have. Because I think that is a huge hurdle in this town to making it more walkable, particularly, is not always looking at what is there, but what could be there, and how the behavior is based on what exists rather than what people would like to do. Or I had a question about if there is, say you have a neighbor that walks door to door for a particular thing and finds that all their neighbors say they would walk to the park if something was there, say they would walk downtown if something was there, to school if something was there, using those 3 intersections as an example. Is there any precedent for using that? Is that even really useful in any way? Or does it have to have some other methodology?
I don't think there's any professional, you could take that into account as the, advisory board, I would think, but.
Yeah, and that may be something that plays into our discussion with the traffic safety policy that we work on. If there's neighborhoods that do surveys or have a neighborhood plan that prioritize certain locations in neighborhoods that help us identify the priorities, that may be something that we talk about with that safety plan. For instance, this park, there's different neighborhoods adjacent to the park. There's across from Monterey Way, there's across from Harvard, and so just to look at these as isolated locations, it may not be as effective as looking at it as a neighborhood. So that may be something that we talk about with that, if there's other ways to look at getting survey information or neighborhood information to prioritize these locations. So I think it's a possibility, but it's nothing that we've done previously is when it comes to traffic calming or traffic safety to do surveys and and try to anticipate what impacts a project may have.
Well, you know, what we did, Dave, I'm sure you'll recall, what we did in University Place, when we brought that information to the city commission, it made a lot of difference at the end of the day. In fact, it's hard to say. I think, you know, the neighborhood was pretty much, you know, behind it. But the fact that we brought data in and, you know, we had the data, it was very, very easy to understand, and it was a good sample too. It made a difference, you know. But that's a smaller neighborhood too, with 250 homes. It really helped the neighborhood understand how the neighborhood felt, and that's the hard one to get to at any level.
I have a couple comments. The pedestrian demand model isn't in the MPO's pedestrian plan, but they do have a pedestrian priority network that essentially identifies arterials, collectors, and safe routes as the priority network. That you could argue that the arterial and collector routes represent either some demand or potential conflict. So there might be some utility to paying attention to that priority network. And the three roads that you mentioned, Aaron, are all identified in the priority network. Inverness and Monterey and Tennessee. Yeah, so they're already on there. You might consider in the table that's kind of become a standard part of the memos that we get, that has the, you know, kind of a summary of, does this have is it part of the safe routes, is it on the bike plan? Maybe we could add a section that just says yes or no, is it part of the pedestrian or pedestrian priority network? At least give us maybe another touch point with what are we trying to do here. The other comment I had was I'm kind of curious about, with the Safe Routes projects that are underway for the summer, if perhaps this fall or next spring might be a good time to do a survey that gets to, you know, helping us detect any changes in people's perception around safety. Because I think all those projects will be done this summer, right?
Yep.
And that, you know, we finally can say, hey, there have been some significant changes. It's time to listen again to what at least that constituency is asking or wanting. The last time the question wasn't, or the main concern was about crossing safety. So maybe there's some way the city could, like, help with that design of the survey. Like last time, we just used the National Safe Routes to School template. They have a parent survey. I mean, we just felt like it was good to stick with the tried and true, but the city's got good capacity probably to think more about what are the right questions to ask that constituency. Maybe take some pieces that are, you know, good because we can compare baseline to now, but there might be other questions that would be useful that might help even get to the crux of these challenges around crossing safety and all that. So I just throw that out for food for thought. Like that might be something us think about either fall, spring, or at least start talking about what's the data we need to make better decisions.
And I like a term you used was asking the right questions, and that was the one concern I had when we start, what pops in my head when a neighborhood survey is, well, I don't know, what did you ask?
Right.
Was it a leading question?
Right.
Were you actually mining for good information? So I don't have a problem with people getting that, but I want to know, what did you ask specifically? How was it asked? You know, that kind of stuff. So that's it.
You're right. It needs to be done very thoughtfully.
I think there's an art to creating survey questions.
It's not
Guidance.
done in an evening, you know, for something like this. It needs to be done professionally, really.
Or somebody that knows.
Yeah.
Which is why I asked if there was a precedent for that being used, is because it could be useful,
Right, yeah.
but
But I also don't want to tell a
possibly
neighborhood
not.
they have to pay a consultant $10,000 to go do
Right.
survey results.
Well, I say professionally. There
Yeah,
are
I know.
people in our neighborhood
Yes,
that
yeah.
are professionals that
Right.
did a really good job of putting it together at the end, and they're all over town, so.
Yeah, but I've also experienced really good people that know how to do data, but when it comes to something that's emotional to them, they forget how to collect good data.
All right, so is there any more discussion on this? Everybody ready for a motion?
Motion to accept staff recommendation.
Do I hear a
Second.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, motion passes. How many of us are there? There are six. Six to zero. So number 4, Haskell Avenue and 29th Street intersection.
Hello again. This is kind of a follow-up. It's a little bit different topic, but will probably look familiar to several of you. We had talked a few months ago about this general vicinity, Haskell Lane, and that kind of cut-through traffic that was going through there, and I think we said something like 80-some% of the traffic was taking the cut-through of Haskell Lane there. And, you know, there was that rezoning request that came in, and, you know, who knows what the timeline on that will be. But we also had a request since then from the College and Career Center staff and a parent to look at that intersection. So we have looked at that. We did some additional traffic data out there. We went out, we measured some sight distances and all of those things. That alignment was constructed a little over 2 years ago. It opened, it was done kind of with that 31st Street and the SLT alignment down there. And it doesn't meet the standard warrants for a traffic signal at that intersection. However, based on speeds, you can reduce the thresholds, and it would meet the warrants for a signal. However, the warrants for the signal are all coming from the cut-through traffic, not from the College and Career Center. So the College and Career Center, I believe it's something like 400 vehicles in and out each day. You can see kind of what's coming there from the other direction. Most of that is the cut-through traffic on Haskell Lane. So the thought of staff was, well, we should probably address that issue versus put in a very expensive signal there. You know, no guarantees what that development will do, and it may end up warranting a signal at some point when that develops. But at this point, I think what we've realized is that maybe there's something we should do in the meantime. I know it's probably not going to be well received there, but just kind of wanted to bring it to you really more for a recommendation than anything at this point. Just see what you guys thought. I think as far as dealing with the two approaches here to this, we were just going to try to put some intersection ahead signs, some warnings, so that as people were coming around that corner, they knew there was an intersection that they were approaching there. I looked at the crash data. There's been 2 crashes since that current alignment opened 2 years ago at that intersection. And so really the recommendation is put those intersection ahead signs, and then we do think we should probably look into some type of temporary diverters to cut down on that cut-through traffic. I think it's a discussion we're going to have to involve the property owners there with, but wanted to know your guys' thoughts on that and see if that's something you thought that we should go forward with. And not exactly sure what that would look like, but it would likely be some type of temporary barricades, since we are looking at that area potentially being redeveloped in the future.
How would you convert it?
What's that?
How would you convert it?
Put some probably type of temporary barricades at one end or the other.
Which
What's-
one?
Don't know yet. We'd have to talk to the businesses and see, because I know there's some concerns with the fueling center there. So we'd probably try to meet with the businesses and see what we thought was going to be something that they could support and that could help. It may not fully fully cut that off, but I think if we could even significantly decrease that volume, it would be a big improvement there. So, any thoughts?
I have some discussion items, so maybe I ought to save them.
I have some questions.
Okay.
Questions, let's do questions and.
So I just wanted to make sure I understood the posted speed limit being used for the sight distance standard. The 85th percentile for that street is approximately 45 miles per hour, but the sight distance paragraph talks mostly about the posted speed limit. I was curious, like, why the 85th percentile speed wasn't used.
Well, typically when you look at sight distance, you do it on the posted speed limit. You can see there it's a little bit short, the to the left. So obviously with the higher speed, I mean, it was more for representation's sake. It would only be worse. It's just, we discussed it, and I don't really know what you could do there. It's an arterial street, recently designed and constructed. So I'm not really sure what you could do to impact speeds there, other than, like I said, put the intersection ahead signs and such, and enforcement really is what I think it comes down to. I mean, or if you have some other suggestions.
So
certainly
to get the speed down to 35, would that require traffic calming on that street?
It's an arterial, so, I mean,
So the arterial was designed for speeds at 45 miles an hour, but is posted at 35? Like, I guess I'm curious if the speed limit is wrong, or like something seems amiss when that's a pretty big difference.
Yeah, I wasn't involved in the design. I don't know if you were.
Yeah,
I believe KDOT designed this. So I don't know what it was designed, yeah, I don't know what it was designed for, but it was designed by KDOT, and
It all feels like a highway.
Yeah, well, that's a very...
So the speed limits are, as I understand, the speed limit is supposed to be based on the 85th percentile. So is the speed limit in this case, does it need to be increased?
well, I would never probably recommend increasing speeds because people are driving too fast.
I thought the justification for the speed limit was that it needs to correspond with people's actual use, like that 85th percentile is what people are doing.
I don't think we've ever adjusted speeds up, but when you originally design a street, you're supposed to take that into account.
Yeah, the 85th percentile speed is and signing up for the 85th percentile speed is statistically the safest
Right.
speed to sign it as.
That's what I was remembering.
So, which could be different than the design speed of the street. And that would be based off the geometrics, and sometimes the amount of traffic is a function of the speed of traffic too. Less traffic volume, higher speeds, because it's more, just get more potential.
I guess what I'm curious about is, how does this end up happening? Like, in our community where we end up with roads that seem designed to make it comfortable for someone to go 45, and we're expecting the people to travel 35. Like, I'm curious how many of our streets are designed that way, and how often is our challenge with traffic calming because we've designed the street to make it easy, kind of, and comfortable to drive that fast. And then if our sight distance standard is based on this posted speed limit, not on the actual speed, it seems problematic also. So,
Yeah, I would say I think we're trying to do a better job of designing streets that are right-sized for the speed that you want people to go. I mean, I can't speak historically. I think a lot of communities probably designed streets that were too wide.
Well, I mean, the truth is Haskell Lane probably shouldn't connect to Haskell Avenue.
people would, yeah, I get
It was
that.
probably a political
And I-
decision to connect that, and
I would imagine that might actually slow people down as they're trying to approach the intersection. So the speed limit that's there at 45 mile an hour might even be higher if there were no.
I don't know,
People trying
that
to-
light would also, the signal would also be turning red more often. slowing down traffic, and you would probably have more volume on the street, which may slow it down. If you cut off Haskell Lane, it could go either, I mean,
That would warrant a light? Is that what you're thinking?
What's that? No, I'm
That
just
would-
saying that a lot of people are avoiding the signal at 31st Street. So the signal at 31st Street is probably staying green to the through traffic most of the time. There isn't a lot of cross traffic approaching that.
Got it. So that would slow it down.
I mean, it probably would have some impact if people weren't cutting through on Haskell Lane. I think also you're creating some more issues probably for the Career Center turning out when there's people across them from them trying to turn left also. I think you're creating potential conflicts there that really cutting that off would likely make that safer also. That
I mean, with Haskell Lane open, if you're coming down 31st and you look, you see the old alignment, which goes straight through.
it's a pretty nice.
If you go through, you have to wait for the light. And if you're coming down Haskell to go 31st the other way, you have to take the jog handle turn, which is awkward. So as long as that's there, people will choose to take that.
Yeah, and doing the diverter or cutting off traffic is not going to affect the speed, probably not going to affect the speed on Haskell.
But the speed on Haskell isn't so much the problem as people trying to sneak in to a little bad situation there.
I mean,
Well, when we discuss this, we need to discuss bikes and peds, you know, because we're talking about cars. And I'll save that, but I'm having trouble saving it.
I have a question. That was, the crash data there is, a couple things. Do you know where they were? I mean, I don't know.
yeah, they were turning. They were turning.
They're coming
On
from
to
college
Was it
career
cars?
center.
Cars. They were both
Hitting
vehicles.
cars.
There was no pedestrians or bicycle crashes there.
Okay.
There's 2 vehicle crashes there. And they were both turning vehicles, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, the bike path actually crosses the lane side right there.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll
Yeah, and
talk
even
about
there,
that.
there's a couple accidents there. It's, again, not significant number. One of them, the person just ran through at Haskell Lane. That general vicinity, there's not a high number of crashes. Doesn't mean that there's not a potential, but that there has not been. But I don't know if there's anything else, Dave, that you would recommend for Haskell Avenue. We've discussed it, and I mean, if you guys have some other suggestions.
Well, I could make a suggestion. It seems like if you could prevent people from turning right on southbound Haskell on the 29th, that would be nice. And it would also be nice if you could prevent people from turning, well, the businesses wouldn't go for it, from turning right onto Haskell Lane and westbound 31st. That would, you know, that would reduce it down to the people just going to the business being inconvenienced. But
Before we get too into suggestions and other discussion items, could we hear from the public? So, public comment on this item?
Yes. I'm the parent Amanda referred to. My name is Julie Coleman. My daughter's a student at Lawrence High School, and during the spring semester, she was enrolled in the CNA course at the College and Career Center, which hasn't been mentioned specifically in this discussion. She's also one of the accidents. So on February 8th, she was exiting the College and Career Center, which is, there is a marking there, but not a very clearly marked entrance off of Haskell. And I don't know how many of you have actually driven that segment of road, driving north on Haskell, and driven it with the perspective I took the day I drove it after, the couple days I drove it after her accident, which was to see how long it took me as I rounded that blind curve on 31st Street to recognize there was a school entrance right ahead of me. And so let me tell you a little bit though. She was leaving the College and Career Center and heading back to Lawrence High School, and she looked left towards the blind curve, and it was clear, and she looked right, and it was clear, and she proceeded to cross Haskell to get onto what you're calling Haskell Lane. And she was T-boned so hard by a north driving vehicle, which I think your comment, Mr. Bryan, was very relevant. I suspect because that road appears to be designed to go faster, and I'm guessing he went straight through, that he had a green light on that intersection. He T-boned her so hard that she spun all the way across the intersection, jumped the curb, was facing east, all of her, the airbags deployed, and her car was totaled. So it was a pretty significant impact. Now, she was cited for inattentive driving because she did what I think a lot of newer drivers leaving the College and Career Center, and even a lot of us experienced drivers might have done. She looked left and it was clear. She looked right and it was clear, and she proceeded. I have a video as I had her hold my phone as we drove up 31st Street going 35, and from the time I noticed the driveway as I rounded that curve, so I was being very attentive to, I knew there was a driveway there. It was just under 2 seconds in my counting. That's not very official, but I went 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and I was at the entrance. So someone driving up that road had that long time, that long to see a vehicle, which they clearly didn't. So my recommendation, when I contacted city commissioner after that incident and talked to Patrick Kelly, I wasn't even thinking about signals. I was thinking about why we need to have more clear markings on 31st Street. Not that there's an intersection ahead, but there's a school entrance ahead, so that at least there's some warning or alert to a driver that they better be following that 35-mile-an-hour speed limit in a line of traffic that feels much more suited to a faster speed. I'll also admit that I paid attention after that, and I would quickly accelerate to almost 40 or 45 coming up that little hill, and then realize, whoa, it's only 35 here, and I'd back off. The other thing that could be really helpful, and I've seen in various places, is on the stop sign that where the kids stop to leave the College and Career Center, you can find little signs that are black and white signs with 2 big black eyeballs looking to the side, and it says, remember to look twice, or look twice, to remind those newer drivers that they need to look left again. Because even if they're turning right, even if you follow up on a recommendation to barricade Haskell Lane, even if they're turning right or turning left, they need to remember to look at that blind curve again, because in that time they've looked right and proceeded, a car may have rounded that curve going 40 or 45 miles an hour, or maybe even the speed limit. So fortunately she wasn't injured. The driver of the other car wasn't injured. Her car that she'd had for 3 weeks was totaled. And it was a good learning experience, but I think about the potential for other accidents. And they're building a Boys and Girls Club Center there now. So there's only going to be more vehicles coming in and out of there in the future. Buses and parents coming in and out of there. So that's my recommendation. I actually wrote out some comments if you're interested. If any of you would like to see the video I took or the pictures of her total vehicle, I'll share them with you as well. But I think it's just some simple things like a warning sign, and a reminder to kids to look twice could be really helpful, and I appreciate your time.
Other public comment?
Hi, Michael Allman again. This intersection, this multi-legged intersection, if any place in town calls for a roundabout, it's here. This is one of the most confusing intersections in town. This issue first came up in 2016 with the plan to put in a connection bicycle trail link right there between the Burroughs Creek Rail Trail and the K10 trail. That's the section we're talking about, and that's the intersection right there. 2016. The bicycle trail was proposed along here to cross Haskell Lane and connect with the K-10 trail right there. And here's the Burroughs Creek and the rail trail. Sustainability Action first brought this to the City Commission in the summer of 2016. They recommended the Traffic Safety Commission look at it, and they did in, I think it was October of 2016. We proposed that the conflict of this bicycle trail across here and the turning traffic that Commissioner Evans referred to coming along here like that, or this way like that, but primarily the southbound, that was a big safety concern, conflict with that bicycle trail. David Woosley, the traffic engineer, did traffic counts, and there's Mr. Cronin may verify, I think it was something like 70 or 85% of the southbound Haskell traffic did this dogleg jog onto Haskell Lane and cut through down to 31st Street. Some huge number. The Traffic Safety Commission said, let's wait till the SLT's open and see what the counts look like, and all this whole configuration is done. They took traffic counts later. It's the same numbers. People are still cutting through southbound on that section. Here's what it looks like when they make that loop-de-loop dogleg around there. There's no stop sign. They can turn right without stopping. They can then make a quick left without stopping. Major conflict. Well, the Traffic Safety Commission tabled it until after the completion of the SLT, but they went out of existence. So it never came back to them for reconsideration. I think this came here at one point too. And I can't remember the result, but it was no particular action taken. But in the meanwhile, the Planning Commission considered a proposal by Scott Zaremba that Amanda referred to, future development of that whole area. And I think you and the City Commission, or the Planning Commission certainly, wanted to look more in depth at the bicycle connection and the traffic, because all this is going to change. Long and the short, I like Amanda's proposal for temporary, you said diverters, I think, maybe do you mean partial closure? I'm not sure, but.
Yeah, like probably with some type of barricade, a low-cost temporary option to stop that cut through.
I would suggest that what we had proposed initially was blocking off the north part of Haskell Lane, people accessing only from the south onto 31st, entering and exiting onto 31st. Nobody seems to like that, but we could do a partial closure right there to block off southbound traffic, allow people at the fueling center here and Eagle trailers and the storage to exit north and go their way, but we would stop this cut-through traffic to the south. That would be my suggestion, short of putting a roundabout there. I think that would be the best solution, but that's more long-term. And that depends on Scott Zaremba's long-term plans. He said he would like to put a bicycle connection between the Burroughs Trail and the SLT Trail when he does his development, but who knows when that's going to happen. So I would say consider a partial closure, diverter, whatever you want to call it, for southbound traffic.
Thank you, Michael.
Hey, thank you.
Any other public comment? All right, discussion?
Well, I'll just reiterate what we've kind of already heard. I had a concern myself at the school when that opened and the way it was, my concern for inexperienced drivers and a bit of a blind area and fast traffic, and also correct that the new teen center will be opening up out there when the school year starts, and they're going to be running. I was talking to Kobe out there the other day, and they're hoping to bring 4 to 5 bus loads of middle school kids there, secondary, I should say secondary, not middle school, because also high school. 4 to 5 bus loads, and maybe even some kids on our buses as well. And then, buses, that would obviously cut down on traffic, but then at some point those kids are going to need to be picked up. So there are going to be vehicles coming in there they're going to be open until 7, so probably from 4:30 till 7 o'clock there'll be a bit of a steady stream or an uptick, but it's definitely something to deal with, I think.
Well, I guess I'll be the bike advocate here. We probably, in a normal 12-month period, my wife and I go through cross Haskell Lane from the Burroughs Trail to the K-10 trails to the west, probably 100 to 150 times a year. And it's really a heavy bike. I don't know if we've done bike counts there, but gee, on a weekend, particularly 6 to 10 in the morning, this is really pretty heavily traveled by bicycles. And you would hope so, because it is part of the loop. Ultimately, it needs to be improved, but the Haskell Lane situation is a tough one from both directions. I agree with Michael. The right turns from Haskell southbound are an issue, but the people cutting through on northbound Haskell Lane, and there's a stop sign on that curb, but it's not effective at all. And there's also some really blind spots. The area on the east side of Haskell Lane from 29th to the north is way overgrown. And the sight lines are really difficult there. It would be really helpful just to, trim up the overgrowth there. That would help a lot. We've decided to work around that, and we just cross 29th and then go west on 29th to the Burroughs Trail, just to avoid Haskell Lane altogether. But I really commend you guys for trying to, control the volume here. That would be really a major improvement there. But there's a lot of potential for crashes there, just due to the volume of bikers in this situation.
So it seems to me that a diverter would help a lot of what is going on there, but that doesn't completely address the issue.
Right.
I mean, a diverter, there's a space that's, the spot that's, I think that's true that the other thing that would address the issue is a roundabout, but I don't know that that's what do you not think that's the case? A roundabout would be, it's not that it's possible necessarily right now, but do you think that's a intersection with a?
Yes, no, Sarah, yes.
I'm asking city staff.
Well, yeah, I don't think it would meet the warrants for a signal or roundabout if you had some traffic control on Haskell Lane. So I think there's really two issues. There's the speed of traffic on Haskell and the sight distance pulling out of the College Career Center, and that's a separate issue. And then there's the amount of traffic that's cutting through. And I remember the numbers, it is close to about 80%. I think it was 78 to 80% that are using that as a bypass versus going down to the traffic signal. And so, and I agree, I've been on that crossing. It's part of the Lawrence Loop, and I've crossed it as a bicyclist, and you gotta look both ways and go quickly because there's so much going on there. So there's those two different issues. So I think staff's open to doing something temporary to see if it helps safety for that, for people cutting through, but that doesn't necessarily alleviate the speed issue on Haskell. But it doesn't meet any warrants for a traffic signal, and currently, based off volumes or crashes, it's something that we need to continue to look at, particularly if there's going to be an increase in trip generation to the College and Career Center, Boys and Girls Club. And if there's, you know, in the short term, additional signage that we can do that immediately. Those are low-cost options, but that doesn't necessarily, signs don't necessarily clear all the speeding issues. But, so yeah, there's really two different things.
But I thought just to clarify, maybe Amanda, you kind of insinuated anyway that potentially if we had more traffic traveling Haskell, that could potentially create more at the light, and it would.
Well,
I
yeah.
mean, I know it's something you won't know until you see it.
Yeah, we don't know until we see it, but I guess my point was that light, most people are getting a green going forward on Haskell. And because I've been through it, I don't think I've ever been stopped at it. I don't know. I mean, we could do data again out there. You're also going to have a higher volume on that. I was looking at the street view too. Really, the only way to improve the visibility out there is, well,
Excavate.
The hill's in the way.
Yeah.
So on the property going back behind the sidewalk, it goes up pretty fast. Now you can, you know, creep forward too on that. We looked at the sight distance from behind the stop line, and also, you know, typically you take the sight distance from 14 feet from the traveled way. So that's actually a little bit forward, but that could help, but that's not something really that would probably be something that we would do. I don't really know what else you could do to slow speeds on Haskell, though. It's really...
Is the ask really here, should we put additional signage? Is that...
I think it was just more of a discussion to let you know it's a conversation that came up, and I mean, we can put this isn't a sign that requires an ordinance. They're warning signs. I think it was more just to communicate with you guys that it's a discussion. It also kind of tied into the issue that we were talking about with the cut through, because as I started looking at it, the issues tied together, because that's what generates the warrant for a traffic signal. So that's probably something that should be dealt with also. It's kind of, you know, additional to this. So it was really, nothing requires, you know, action or an ordinance. It was just a discussion we wanted to have. And I think for the Haskell Lane piece, I would assume we'll reach out to the businesses, try to have some conversation with them over what they could live with. Try to explain to them the concerns we have, and probably bring that to a future meeting and have that discussion on what we could do there.
I use that card lock station, the gas station there,
Okay.
and I would not stop using it if there was a diverter.
Which
I'd
way
still-
do you, I haven't looked.
I go
Do you
both.
come in from the north, or do you come in from the south?
I do both.
Can you
'cause
do either?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not, it wouldn't be that far for me to go around
Yeah.
to get there. I'd still use it. And about the eyeballs looking both ways signs, is there anything official about that?
No, I mean, you could put a cross traffic does not stop. I think it's probably obvious that cross traffic doesn't stop there.
But a good reminder.
But that's not a approved sign. It might be allowable on like private property or something where they.
Yeah.
Is the speed limit sign anywhere near where you're approaching that intersection?
GIS is not working right now. I was trying to look at some things. I'm not 100% sure where it's at. I have to look into it.
I'm wondering about the speed, the trailer you mentioned earlier.
Put that out there.
If that could be used for a while to help people be aware that the speed limit is 35 and that they're going above it.
Yeah, it looks like there is as you're coming up that hill, there's a speed limit sign per street view. Yeah, we could look at the speed monitoring trailer too, see if we could find a place to place it.
My general inclination with signs in Lawrence is, after we had the sign discussion, probably a year ago, it came up and we talked about it. I started looking more at signs. and realized how many signs there were and how very few of them I saw. I mean, I guess it doesn't hurt, but like we've talked about before, the more signs you put up, the less you see them. So I tend to gravitate more towards engineering fixes like diverters. If that's possible at some point, at least to fix one of those. I mean, if this is just sort of a discussion now, I mean, I think we have out there what sounds like it might help, but.
When I'm talking about signs, I'm not talking about Haskell Lane. I mean, the issue that I'm concerned about is Haskell Avenue.
Yeah.
The speeds are exceeding the speed limit. It's an arterial street, so we don't have the options of traffic calming. So it really ties our hands. So what could be done to elevate people's awareness that they're speeding? I mean, a police officer right there would be great if that's an option, but it's not. If there's a way to help people realize they're going too fast. What else is available to us?
I don't really know of anything. I mean, other than geometric improvements that make the road, narrow the road down, which obviously is quite resource intensive as far as the budget goes.
Yeah, I just don't think that's an option either.
Yeah, it's not, I wouldn't say that's probably not an option in the immediate future.
I mean, I think the best bet is to hope that one day there's a warrant for a stoplight there. At least that helps people that are trying to get in and out.
Yeah, and I think as we see that development come in, we'll be able to take a look at what that's doing and what the layout is there and see if there's anything we can do to alleviate it. I mean, the only other thing I could think of is you don't allow left turns, but again, that's a sign and people can turn left if they so choose, even if you put that no left turns. That's the only other thing that could potentially make it safer is people not turn left. But I don't know that that's really, I mean, a lot of people are probably trying to get to the SLT, so.
You're saying left turn out of the career center?
Yeah, but again, it's still a sign, and if it's not enforced, it's not going to solve all problems either, but.
So I'm not exactly sure what direction you need from us, because, I mean. Just
wanted ideas in the discussion more than anything.
So you don't need a motion then?
No.
Okay.
No.
Great.
I think we'll look into what signage we can put. We'll start talking to the businesses out there about Haskell Lane, and we'll see that come back around.
Okay. Great. All right. Number 5, staff memo on curb radii design.
All right. So I think you all got an email from Carol Bowen. She was wanted us to discuss curb radii design and what goes into that. So I pointed out a couple of things here. Really, at the end, there's really a no one-size-fits-all design. I think when we do reconstruction projects, we look at a bunch of different factors, including lane width, street classification, the design vehicle, right-of-way, site distance, all those different factors go into consideration when we're doing curb radii design for intersections. As you know, there's pros and cons to everything. When we have smaller curb radii, they do slow the speed of turning traffic, but the counter to that is if you have large vehicles, trucks, they can overtrack the curb, drive over the ramps, and there's some concerns with that. So, it's really, there's a lot of factors that go into that, so there's really no one-size-fits-all approach to design. We look at these things when we're doing street reconstruction projects, when we look at adding median cutouts for crossing the road half at a time, refuge islands, I guess I'd say. or raised crosswalks or other improvements at intersections like bulb outs. When we're doing design, downtown's got a lot of curb bulb outs that reduce the length of the crossing. So that's just kind of an overall summary of the different considerations that we look at when we're doing curb radii design, and just wanted to be able to respond to that question. So I guess if you guys had any questions for me, or if there was any public comment on it, we'd be willing to listen to that as well.
Questions? Public comment?
I first noticed the problem with curve radii at 27th and Louisiana when they had their problem with the detour when 31st Street was closed. And we had this video, and there were kids in the street, and there were cars coming around the corner and all that kind of thing. And after it cleared up and the intersection was reconstructed, they had a large radii. And what that did was, anyone who's been a parent knows how they try to cruise up to the school, drop the kids off, and run for it. What happens is it encourages the driver to roll around the corner instead of stopping and then turning around the corner. And I can't remember, wasn't it even a law at one time that you were supposed to stop before you turned right? I don't remember, but we're not doing that anymore, and that is definitely a hazard for pedestrians. So then I came and I showed you pictures of Louisiana and 23rd. That kind of an intersection is high near impossible. You can't reach the button, and the ramp is all over the place, and it throws you out into the street. And I got to thinking about it. What's happening here is every time we disturb the balance between the bicycle, the pedestrian, and the automobile, we have a problem. And we make it very easy for the automobile, but every time you do that, everyone else pays for it. I think we and we redid all the intersections for safe routes to school by rounding the radii, by making it wider. And I think, oh no. But I also don't think that we should go backwards. I have read that there are some communities that went and tore them out. I would be happy if we moved forward and didn't do it anymore. Like you have one coming up at, is it 14th and Mass? Is that the one that's coming up? When you're thinking of it, think about all of the movement that's going to happen, not just the drivers. You're going to have pedestrians, you're going to have cyclists. How is that mix going to happen together? And I can almost guess that at a corner like that with the school there, that making a large radii is not the way to go. And I agree with engineering that you can't just make a blanket policy. On the other hand, there's this new movement they're calling urbanism, where they are actually thinking, hey, you know what, some of that old stuff was working. So maybe we shouldn't be trying to modernize it. Maybe we should think about what we already have. So I haven't seen this memo yet. I can't address it directly, but I think we need to be looking at this a little bit more carefully, because if we really want pedestrians to risk their lives out there, we want to make it as safe for them as we can. Thank you.
Michael Allman. I have a couple observations, I guess I should say. I can see any number of intersections in Lawrence, particularly in the old areas of Lawrence, that have, I guess it would be called tight curb radii or short curb radii, turn radii. For example, the truck route Haskell Avenue, let's say trucks going north at 11th, and they go west to Delaware, and they go north on Delaware, and they go west on 8th to Connecticut, and go right on Connecticut. All those turns, well, not the 11th and Haskell, but all those other turns are the old city blocks of very tight curves. And yet, 50-foot semis make those turns every day. And I think we need to consider the design of intersections that don't put large vehicle needs first, but just include it as a balance, like Carol says, in the mix. They can slow down and they can swing wide, and the other cars who are coming either direction can wait for that big vehicle to get around. It's going to slow things down, and that really is the key, to slow the traffic down so that the visibility of the pedestrian is enhanced. When a car is looking, when a driver of a motor vehicle is looking both ways for a break in the traffic, and they want to make a fast turn, they don't see the pedestrian or the bicyclist is the problem. So slowing it down really is the key, and a tight curb radius slows them down. Conversely, and this applies to bicycles as well, like Mr. Cronin said, there's no one solution, but what's called a complete intersection, I think that's the term, has very large turn radii, very large and elongated curves, so that when a vehicle gets all the way around that curve, they are at 90 degrees to the bikeway or the sidewalk, whatever it is, which is very far away from the street. Do you see the image I'm bringing there? So the visibility of the pedestrian or the bicyclist who's crossing that street is at 90 degrees to the turning vehicle, so they see them right there. They're not kind of off in the periphery. So that's another alternative. So it's just, the bottom line is the visibility of the pedestrian or the bicyclist in any of these designs. Thank you.
Discussion?
I'm just curious about the curb radii that we have. Like Michael's comment about, certain parts of the city have different standards or were built differently. If it's the case that causes people to ride up on the curb, then there should be some data suggesting that the maintenance costs are excessive, or the bus routes can't be routed through there because, according to the memo, that's what happens if you don't have the curb radii built right. And this seems theoretical, and I'm left feeling like I don't have enough information. Like, what is the implication of having curbs designed like they used to be? If that was safer for pedestrians, and that was a more pedestrian-oriented time of our history. Is that just a matter of, well, you'll have to maintain the curbs more, or you'll have to maintain the curb? And I get it, if you drive over the curbs, it'll break them down, but is that really a problem in our community, where the old curb style is? And I'm not sure, like, is there a place where you can say, oh, here's where it was, the design change happened? It started at Iowa Street and further west. I'd rather have some data to help us understand that instead of just my anecdotal observations, if that's possible.
That would be interesting to see. I don't know if we have any.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the towns is every intersection is different, so I don't know if it's necessarily old. In older parts of town is different than newer parts of town. Some intersections we've reconstructed, we've reconfigured the curb radius to be less than it was before. in some of the tighter spaces that we have, that some of the concern is bus traffic. Some of the major routes, like 19th and Louisiana, a bus can't make a right turn there, and they have to use 21st Street instead because they're unable to make that turn. And there's some other bus routes that have had some to be changed because of curb radii and turning, and so yeah, it's I think it's again, it's dependent on the design vehicle, the route, the location, amount of traffic. So I can't necessarily say where, what parts of town had different radii without doing a lot of extensive research of old plans and getting a lot of data. But I would say that whenever we do a project, even the maintenance project that we're doing on 23rd Street, Carol mentioned 23rd in Louisiana, we're looking at shifting the crosswalk to get off of the radius to make it shorter. Then we're having have a discussion of whether or not it's too far from the intersection and the stop bar, and so there's a lot of different factors that go into the radii design just on a maintenance type project. But we do look at those things with all these projects that we do. If there's any other thoughts on information we could provide, we'd be happy to try to get you some more, but without doing a lot of more research, I don't know what else would be helpful.
Is it fair to say that with what we've been tasked with as the Transportation Commission, we need to look at moving intersections away from large crossing distances to more visibility and shorter crossing distances? Maybe not necessarily through one way, like I've brought this up before, the difference between 23rd Street before and 23rd and Iowa now. And you can go to the next major arterial at Castle, and it's much more comfortable to cross, not that I do it a lot, but at 23rd and Iowa than it is Castle and Ways, because when you're on 23rd, there seems to be a better yield rate to the right, and I think it's because the pedestrians have been brought way forward so the cars actually see them. Where on Castle, you're actually standing behind the cars as you're getting ready to cross, so they can't even see you when they're turning right. So, I mean, I think that no matter how we do it, we need to move away from that circumstance.
It seems to me what can we control? And what we can control are future projects. And, obviously Dave's example of 23rd in Louisiana is being thought of, is being given thoughtful considerations, I think. We live in an old city. The historical context is interesting in terms of, when this city was built over the years and what the criteria were 75 years ago don't necessarily work today. We're not going to fix all of that. But I think where we have problems, we need to look at it. And, certainly since I've been sitting here, I think that we've been pretty thoughtful about the new projects, and when we do have a maintenance project that would address this, that it's addressed.
Any other comments? Item 6, commission items, Complete Streets Subcommittee.
Okay. We, as a committee, with some input from Dave and Amanda, were pretty free to explore this policy. And it took us a while, but I'd say a couple months ago we landed on 10 points that were directed by Smart Growth of America in evaluating complete streets policies. And what we realized a month or two ago that we thought that we had taken that as far as we could, and we passed that baton to Amanda and Dave to put their engineering background and their higher knowledge of standards and guidelines and stuff like that into play in this thing. And Amanda has done, I think, a great job of taking it to the next step. We have about almost a 2-page policy, which isn't too long, which I think gives us a real good structure to work from. I think the big debate on that is going to be the shall versus the should. Think about that for a second. And we've talked about that a lot in our group too. It's like, well, thou shalt do this in a complete street. And I think the politics and the policies need probably a little more flexibility to consider what should or could happen. Maybe you want to comment about that, Amanda, but I think, you know, I think we see an ideal world here, but realistically, what can we do to make it the best policy that's really going to serve the best interest of the community? The one thing that I think is really going to pull this all together is a checklist, and we've presented that a few times in here too, and what we're envisioning is a pretty complete checklist, kind of a soup to nuts when we're looking at a major renovation project or a new project, that everything is considered. You know, nothing is really left off the table, and it can be addressed by the people sitting at this table and by the people in the community. So I think we're moving along pretty well. I think we're pretty close, Amanda, to you getting our final comments and then taking it to the legal. And I think that's where the shall and should and all that's going to get looked over pretty carefully.
Yeah, I see a couple more meetings of the group just to get the checklist worked out and get the policy kind of as good as we can get it. Legal has, you know, obviously makes sense that they would like to see it before it's presented in a public forum. So it's may push back when this group sees it a little bit, just while we wait for that review. But we are getting pretty close to being ready to send that to them. So.
So is the intent to send it to legal before this group looks at it?
Yeah.
Is there any reason we couldn't share it, but just...
They've asked that they see it.
Oh, really? Okay.
Okay. Commissioner Hurt, Public Transportation Advisory Committee.
Our last meeting was on June 11th. Really had 3 items forward. We took 2 new members, so we filled back out to a full 9 members. Mike Waskowski and Nick Kuzmiak were appointed to fill some terms. Bob updated on some contract procurement. And since then, we've just recently taken delivery on 9 new paratransit vehicles, paid for with KDOT funds, 100%. We had some transit vehicles way past the end of their lives. So 9 of them, that's a fairly significant investment there. All made in Kansas, Eldorados. And then, as we saw in the paper, the transit center study, we reviewed that and accepted it and passed it along to the commission. The 2 recommendations from them were to look at a transfer center, I shouldn't say transit center, but a transfer center, either in the current location between 7th and 8th in Vermont, or over about 19th and Stewart by the fire station, which was similar to what we looked at a couple of years ago. The little difference is this would be a little bit further to the north. It would be kind of a right in, right out. But that way we'd get away from the neighborhood on 21st Street. Commission looked at that and they asked for some more clarification. Some commissioners were hot on the current location, some weren't hot on the going back to 19th and Stewart because they thought the neighborhood would be upset. And they asked for Bob to go back and talk to KU a little bit more. And also ask KU why they weren't in favor of a spot there on 15th Street there, right where Crestline comes in at the bottom of the hill. That's the one that rose high in the report, but KU was not high on that because they had future plans for the area. And there was also some concerns on whether geometrically you can get in and out of there safely. So right now, that's kind of up in the air. Bob will get back to the city commission on that.
Thank you, Commissioner Hurt. Item number 7, the next study session, July 18th, 3:30 p.m.
Yeah, we'll have Bob Nugent and Derek Rogers with us for that. So we can talk transit and Parks and Rec. Bike share, amenities on the trail, any, transit discussions and updates. They've got some amenities projects that they're looking at doing right now, transit, so just kind of an update on that type of thing. It probably won't be a real formal presentation, more of a discussion where you guys can ask some questions and they can share what's going on kind of in their respective worlds.
Okay. I will not be present at that meeting.
I'm going to miss that one too. But I can send somebody if we need somebody to talk about the bike share at KU.
It's kind of up between you and Derek. I know Derek's been pretty involved too, so if you feel it'd be useful,
Okay.
Was there any additional items? I think we're adjourned. We're adjourned.
Do you need a motion in a second?
Do we need a motion?
I don't think we do.
Well,
We can.
motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second. All in favor?
I was told we didn't.
I want to talk about the transit center until 11.
Oh, that's okay.
We can go to a
I'm
bar
supposed to-
somewhere.